You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. And on today's episode of the podcast, we're going to be reviewing the third test of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India from the GABBA. And, it was a draw at the end of the day because the weather played spoil sport. The rain was relentless. And unfortunately, this third test match of this series ended in a draw. But what it has done is that going into Boxing Day for the fourth test of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy, it certainly set up what will be a mouth-watering contest between Australia and India on Boxing Day, with the series locked at 1-1. I think both teams will be reasonably pleased, I suppose, coming out of this test match. I think both teams would have wanted a result. Australia were pretty dominant in this test match. They got themselves in a strong position in the test match. Centuries from Travis Head and Steve Smith. Them putting on a big partnership as well. Australia getting over 440 in the first innings in a dominant position. Unfortunately, weren't able to force a result due to the weather, of course. But India, on the other hand, will be very delighted to get out of this test match with a draw. Rohit Sharma will be the most happiest person on the entire planet after getting out of this test match with a draw. His decision to win the toss and bowl first came under some criticism. He hasn't performed as a captain or with the bat. So I think he'll be the most delighted person in all of the planet and the world, given that India were able to get out of this test match with a draw going into Melbourne still at 1-1. And India showed a bit of fight with the bat. They avoided the follow-on. They showed a bit of fight with the ball to try and get something out of this test match because, if we're honest, they were pretty much outplayed in this test match by Australia. They were in a very difficult position being on the back foot. But they were able to get something out of this test match, and I think they'll be pleased to get out of it with a draw. But we did see some entertaining cricket throughout the 5 days, even though the rain kept going and disappearing, then came back. We saw some good batting. We saw some good bowling. We saw some good fielding in this test match. So there's lots to talk about and discuss what happened in this third test match in this episode today of the podcast. And then obviously looking ahead to Melbourne for Boxing Day, of course, looking at how both teams are shaping up for that mouth-watering contest in a test match that will ultimately probably decide who will win the series, with the series locked at 1-1 now following this draw in Brisbane. So let's get into it and talk about how this test match panned out. So let's remind ourselves of what happened in the test match. Let's have a look at the match summary and see how this game panned out. India won the toss, I should say. They chose to bowl first, put Australia in the first innings. Australia were bowled out for 445. Travis Head top scored with 152. Jasprit Bumrah, not a surprise that he took 6 wickets, led the way with the ball for India. India in their reply in the first innings were all out for 260. Rahul top scored with 84. Pat Cummins took 4 wickets, led the way with the ball for Australia. Australia in their second innings, it was a bit of a sort of a fast-forward sort of batting performance by Australia. 7 for 89 declared. They were looking to get some quick runs and try and make a game out of it, I suppose. Pat Cummins top scored with 22. Bumrah took 3 wickets and led the way with India with the ball again. India needed 275 runs to win. Unfortunately, they finished on none for 8 in 2.1 overs when the rain came and pretty much brought an end to the match. Jaiswal and Rahul both top scored with 4 not out each, and no wickets for Australia, as they weren't able to have enough time to pick up any wickets because of the weather. So the match was drawn, and Travis Head, not a surprise, he was named player of the match again for the second test match in a row, following his 152 and a brilliant partnership with Steve Smith. So that's pretty much what happened in this third test match of this series between Australia and India. As expected, before going into the test match, that this match was going to be affected by rain, and that was the case. and the result was a foregone conclusion. Now, there were some key moments and key factors in this game. Two moments that I've highlighted from this game. Travis Head, Steve Smith partnership of 241 was a key partnership for Australia for the fourth wicket. Australia were 3 for 75, and they were able to post 445 because of that partnership between Head and Smith in the first innings to put themselves in a dominant position. Both of them scoring hundreds, both of them putting on that big partnership. That was a key moment in the match as well. Also, Rohit Sharma's decision to bowl first was a key moment. Should he batted first? At one stage, it was looking like Australia 3 for 75. It looked like pretty much a good decision, but in the end, obviously backfired, and that was a key moment in this match as well. Jasprit Bumrah and Akashdeep, that partnership of 47 for the 10th wicket, which helped India avoid the follow-on. That was a key moment in the match because if Bumrah and Deep weren't able to get India over the line in terms of the follow-on, then Australia would have had that option to try and force a result in this match. But those two batted well for the 10th wicket, 47, and that pretty much helped India avoid the follow-on, and Australia had to bat in the match. So those were some of the pivotal moments and the key moments from this test match at the Gabba between Australia and India that really decided who was in front of the test match, and pretty much in terms of India trying to fight back and avoid the follow-on with their batting performance. So that was that. Let's talk about Australia in terms of their team performance in this test match and talk about how they went about things and put themselves in a good position to try and win this test match. But unfortunately, the weather played spoil sport, as we've mentioned. But let's have a talk about Australia. They were in control for most of this test match, but the rain stopped Australia's plans. But I think Australia will be pleased about their performance, how they played in the match. But some questions need to be answered. Some question marks hanging over Khawaja. McSweeney, we know now that Nathan McSweeney won't be a part of Boxing Day. He's been dropped for Sam Constance, who's most likely to make his test debut. So that's tough for McSweeney. Labuschagne's indifferent form continues. Mitchell Marsh is under the spotlight. But I suppose some positives for Australia in this test match with the bat is that Steve Smith returned to the runs, scoring his 33rd test 100. Travis Head continues his good form. Alex Carey was pretty good with his 70. And I thought his wicket-keeping was superb in this test match as well. And even Pat Cummins scored some runs. He scored 42 runs combined across the two innings. He was good with the ball. Mitchell Starc was good with the ball. Obviously, Josh Hazlewood going down with that injury was a bit of a sour taste in the mouth for Australia. But I suppose there's some positives to come out of this match, but some question marks as well. We'll talk about the batting performance. It was a batting performance of a contrast of two halves. 445 in the first innings after being sent in was a great result. Hundreds to Travis Head, Steve Smith, big partnership of 241 for the fourth wicket. Australia were 3 for 75. It could have gone either way there. If Australia lost a couple more wickets, they would have been behind in this test match. But Smith and Head were able to hold firm and were able to put on that big partnership and get Australia up to that 445 mark. Plus the cameo with Alex Carey, who I thought went under the radar with that innings of 70. Just went about his business normally, Kez. No one really talked about him all that much. It was all Smith and Head in that partnership. But he shared a pretty good partnership with Pat Cummins. 58 for the 7th wicket was a bonus for Australia, and they were able to get into a good dominant position there. The second innings, there was a lot of criticism following the second innings. 7 for 89 declared. They're pretty much fast forward, you have to say, from the Australian batting in the second innings. They lost wickets quite frequently, but you could understand why Australia were doing that, obviously trying to force a result in this test match, which was not going to happen. But you could understand why they were batting in the way they did. They promoted certain batters up the order. Mitchell Marsh batted at 4. Travis Head batted in front of Steve Smith. Smith batted at 6. So a bit of promotion and demotion in the order, looking to score some quick runs. They had a lead of 185, Australia, after India were bowled out in their first innings for 260. So they were able to build on that 185-run lead to set India 275 runs to win. But unfortunately, the weather won at the end of the day, and this test match ended in a foregone conclusion, which was a drawn test. So Australia, that was their batting across the two innings. A bit of a mixed bag, really. We saw some fantastic performances. Travis Head, let's talk about him quickly. What else can you say about Travis Head? He's in the absolute best form of his career. 152 following the 140 in Adelaide. He's just scoring runs for fun, really. He's head and shoulders above the rest. He's probably the best batter in the entire series. He's scored over 400 runs. He's the one batter that looks pretty comfortable from both sides, actually. In India, don't really have any answers to combat him. We saw it when India were bowling to him. They tried different plans. They couldn't stick to one plan. They tried a different plan. Every ball was a different tactic, different plan. And that's what Travis Head can do, I suppose, in terms of when he's in this run-scoring sort of mood. Played some very good shots. There was a bit of concern for Travis Head in terms of his... there was a bit of an injury concern in the second innings. He had a bit of tightness in the groin and the quad area. But from all reports, according to Travis Head himself and Pat Cummins, he'll be right for Boxing Day and he will be able to take part in the Boxing Day test. Obviously, Australia want him to be in Melbourne because it's sort of, I suppose it's the case with Travis Head. It's probably like with Bumrah with India. With India in the bowling, it's either Bumrah or bust. For Australia, with the batting, it's either Travis Head or bust. So those two are very important players for both teams in this series in terms of the batting side with Travis Head and the bowling side with Bumrah. But both of them just need support. And both teams are lacking those types of support with the batting and with the bowling support for both Head and Bumrah. But Travis Head just continues on his way. You know, that fearlessness. He's got that Adam Gilchrist vibe about him. He just keeps scoring runs for fun. And another brilliant performance by him, really, the partnership with Steve Smith. And let's talk about Steve Smith. He's been under a bit of pressure. His first 100 since the Ashes test at Lord's back in 2023. His 33rd test 100. He's the second on the list for the most hundreds in test cricket for Australia. The only person that's ahead of him is obviously Ricky Ponting. The person that he surpassed to go into second place was the great Steve Waugh. And Steve Smith, going back to his old technique of 2019, back and across movement, he looked a bit uncomfortable, Smith, as he always does. You know, he's not the most stylish player to look on the eye, but he was able to get the job done and score 100. And you can't discount the great players, I suppose. They always find a way. Whenever they're in difficult form, they always find a way to score, those important runs when they needed to. And I suppose for Australia, it's a good sign that Steve Smith is starting to get his mojo back. He won't be the same player as he once was. As we know, once you get a bit older, you are, more, things become more difficult in the game. Either as a batter or a bowler, things become a lot harder when you get older. But with Steve Smith, for him, he's a quality player, as we know. He found a way. He's a problem solver. He's probably one of the best problem solvers the game's ever had. He was able to find a way, dig in with Travis Head, let Travis Head do his thing at the one end. Smith was in his own bubble at the other end and doing what he did best. He played some very good shots, some nice cover drives, and the on drive down the ground at one stage was superb. Returning to some sort of the Steve Smith that we known to accustomed to over the years. So for Australia, I think they'll be very happy with Smith in terms of his performance. And Steve Smith took a very good catch off KL Rahul. Nathan Lyon was able to get that wicket of KL Rahul. Steve Smith took that one-handed catch at slip to get rid of KL Rahul, which was a superb catch. Obviously, cast your mind back to day 4. First ball of day 4, Pat Cummins got the edge of KL Rahul. He was dropped at first slip by Steve Smith, and then Steve Smith pulled up that outstanding catch to get rid of Rahul in the much later on in the day, I should say, on day 4, and that was off the bowling of Nathan Lyon. So Steve Smith had a pretty good test match. Back to scoring hundreds once again. He'll be disappointed about how he got out in the second innings, but, Australia looking for quick runs and looking to try and make a game of it. But I think he'll be pleased to score that 100 and get that pressure off his shoulders and hopefully get more runs going into Melbourne. But yeah, he fielded pretty well with that catch and did pretty well. Alex Carey was good again. I thought Carey was outstanding in this test match. He goes under the radar, Alex Carey. And the innings that he played in the first innings, 70, good partnership with Pat Cummins of 50-odd. He scored quickly in the second innings, 20 of 20 not out. His wicket-keeping was top-notch. Didn't really make any mistakes behind the stumps, really cares. So he did pretty well. So good to see Alex Carey performing well. He's one of the in-form batters for Australia. Along with him and Travis Head, they're the only two really in form for Australia currently with the bat at the moment. Obviously, as we mentioned, question marks over Khawaja. Yet again, he recently had his 38th birthday in this test match, and he's getting towards that stage now. We're sort of getting towards the stage with Khawaja where I won't be surprised if he calls it quits at the end of this series, given that the pressure he's under. I think he made some comments recently that I want to retire at the end of next year's Ashes series, which is a long way away. It's sort of getting into the territory of David Warner. So if, Khawaja's a pretty smart guy. He's not stupid. He's pretty smart. He knows what he needs to do in terms of scoring runs for the team, but also making the right decision in terms of retiring and just knowing that, maybe it is time to retire or something. I'm not saying he is going to retire, but that could be a possibility. Maybe. We already seen a retirement in this series with Ravi Ashwin retiring after this test match, which came out of the blue. No one was really expecting that from Ashwin, but with Khawaja, we're getting into that territory of David Warner and what happened there. Obviously, the public doesn't take much to turn on you and to obviously criticize you and ask for you to retire and step down. That's what happened with David Warner. That's happening with Usman Khawaja. But with Usman, I suppose, he has that ability to score runs under pressure. I thought in the first innings he played some good shots. He played some pull shots that went to the boundary. The second innings was a poor dismissal, getting out to Bumrah, getting out bowled. The first innings he was out to, let me see here. He was out to Bumrah as well, caught behind by Pant. So very tough at the top of the order in this series, as we know, with Usman Khawaja. Very tough for him, certainly at this age. When you're 38, it is going to be difficult to try and get back to some sort of your best. But as we know with Usman Khawaja, he has the ability to play innings under pressure. We saw that in the Ashes test in Sydney, where he came back into the side for Travis Head. He sort of knew, if I don't make runs here, I'm never going to be back in the side again. He made runs. He made hundreds in that test match. And then obviously opened the batting and pretty much back into the Australian side. I remember the innings he played in the UAE when Australia drew that test match against Pakistan in 2018. So he has the ability to play the big innings, Khawaja, but we really, from an Australian point of view, they really need him to stand up. And in this test match, he will be disappointed with his returns. Labuschagne, after a promising innings in Adelaide, has gone backwards again, 12-1 in this game. He needs to get back into scoring runs. Mitchell Marsh is under pressure. He's not bowling much. A lot of criticism his way. He needs to stand up as well. So that's what Australia need to do. They need those players to stand up, score some runs if they are going to go on and win the series and really challenge India in this test series. And obviously Nathan McSweeney. Now, we know that Nathan McSweeney won't be a part of Boxing Day because he's been dropped because the selectors have gone with Sam Constance for the Boxing Day test, and that's been in the news recently. So we'll talk about, McSweeney and Sam Constance a bit later on in the episode once we preview the fourth test, which will be at the MCG. But McSweeney, he's had a bit of a tough run, and no wonder he was dropped. You got to feel for him. Very tough facing Bumrah at the top of the order. And he got out to Bumrah again in this test match. And, he'll be disappointed to get dropped, but the selectors have decided to change something up going into Melbourne and Sydney. So he'll be disappointed. So all of them had pretty poor test matches, Khawaja, McSweeney, Labuschagne and Marsh. But for Australia going forward, they need Khawaja to score some runs. They need Labuschagne to score some runs. They need Mitchell Marsh to stand up as an all-rounder because he's under pressure more than ever. Bo Webster's in the squad, who's another potential all-rounder that could come in. If Mitchell Marsh doesn't perform in Melbourne, I won't be surprised if he comes in for Sydney. But, anyway, they'll stick with Mitchell Marsh knowing that, he provides something with the bat and with the ball, but they obviously need him to perform. So that's the batting side for Australia. Some good signs. Smith scoring runs again, Head 100, Carey scoring runs. That's a positive sign for Australia, but they need Khawaja, Labuschagne and Marsh to stand up going forward for the remainder of the series. The bowling, let's touch on the bowling a bit here. A gallant bowling effort from Australia. And it was a really good bowling performance. Given the circumstances of Josh Hazlewood going down with a calf injury, the weather interrupting things, rhythm, etc., to bowl India out for 260 in the first innings to gain a lead of 185 was a good result. But they couldn't keep India under the follow-on target of 246. The Bumrah and Deep partnership for the 10th wicket, which was 47 runs, frustrated them. But I thought they did pretty well given the circumstances. I thought Mitchell Starc and Cummins were superb, 7 wickets between them. They did well in the absence of Hazlewood to really stand up. Once again, they ripped through the top order cheaply, had India 5 for 74 inside 23.3 overs. So that's another good sign for Australia that they're getting early wickets and they're putting the India top order under pressure. Nathan Lyon did some bowling in this test match compared to Adelaide. He didn't do much, really, only bowled 1 over, but he got the key wicket of KL Rahul. And as we mentioned when we talked about Steve Smith, he took a very good catch at slip, one-handed specky, which is what Steve Smith does really in the field. He takes those absolute ripping catches. But Nathan Lyon, to be fair, didn't really have much assistance on this GABBA surface. Given the weather, the pitch didn't really break up as much because it was under the covers. So not much help there for Nathan Lyon, but he tore it away as always and, did his role for the team. But I suppose when you're bowling in these sort of conditions with the rain and the weather, it's not easy to bowl with a wet ball. It's like a bar of soap and the ball doesn't really do much once it gets wet. Doesn't really seam or swing much. And that's what happened when Australia were bowling to India. Batting became easier because the ball, was a bit wet and a bit soft and, the conditions didn't really help for bowling either. So, but I thought Australia bowled pretty well. They tore it hard given the disappointment of Josh Hazlewood going down with that calf injury. I thought they did pretty well with a bowler down. The only question mark was Mitchell Marsh not bowling as much. He only bowled 2 overs, and whether or not Australia trusts him in terms of his body holding up and all that stuff. So those questions have been asked. Hopefully, Mitchell Marsh can do more bowling come Boxing Day for that 4th test. We shall see. But I think, Australia will be pretty happy with their performance in this test match. I think the way they played, the way that they were in control in the match, pretty much dominated the test match, really. In normal circumstances, if the weather held and didn't really affect this game, Australia would have been in a dominant position to win. Unfortunately, the weather was the winner at the end of the day and pretty much took a lot of time out of the game to try and force a result. But I think for Australia, they'll definitely gain some positives from this test match. Obviously, the negatives in terms of the batting, key players need to stand up and score runs, find a way to combat Jasprit Bumrah, who's been the difficult challenge and task in this series. But I suppose key players scoring runs like Smith, Head and Carey is a positive sign going forward. So plenty of stuff to work on for Australia, but I think they'll be reasonably pleased with the way they played and the way they bowled and batted, especially in the first innings, and obviously in the first innings as well with bat and ball. I think they'll be pleased with how they stuck at it and were able to put themselves in a very dominant position. But unfortunately, the weather didn't play ball. Let's talk about India. and just talk about their performance in this third test. India, very lucky to get out of this test match with a draw. Once again, the top order failed. The bowling support for Bumrah was not there. Big talking points in those areas. Rohit Sharma under pressure with his captaincy, his batting form, and also his decision to bowl first in this test match. So plenty of question marks for India going into Melbourne. Rohit Sharma's form, the top order collapsing again. The only one who really stood up was KL Rahul. The bowling, Bumrah was outstanding once again, but he didn't have much support from Kumar Reddy or Siraj or Deep, especially in the first innings. He sort of got that support of the second innings, but the second innings is where Australia were just throwing the bat and scoring quick runs, really. But in the first innings, that's where it mattered, and really that bowling support wasn't there. So there are some concerns for India going forward, but I suppose for India, the way they batted to avoid the follow-on, the way they fought back with the ball in the second innings, they've definitely gained something from this test match. But putting those things aside, if they look back at the performance in the first innings, they would say, yeah, you know what, we weren't quite up to the mark and we were very poor in the first innings. And they were. Their fielding was poor. The tactics to Travis Head were all over the place. They let him get in and get set. Rohit Sharma under pressure. So a lot of things to work on for India. So we'll talk about the batting. Bowled out for 260. Once again, the top order collapsed. They found themselves 5 for 74. KL Rahul stood up. Jadeja stood up with the bat. Both of them put on 67 for the 6th wicket. And obviously, you had the 10th wicket partnership between Bumrah and Deep, which was 47 for the 10th wicket. They got India over the follow-on target, which was 246 in response to Australia's 445. It's 200 runs the difference for the follow-on. So they got over that. They avoided the follow-on, and massive celebrations in the dugout from the team, as you would in that sort of situation where you know that you can't win the game. You don't want to follow on because that's a pretty demoralizing sort of thing to go through, really, as a team in a test match. But, the celebrations said it all in the dugout. They were pretty happy to get over the follow-on target. But still, they will be disappointed about their batting. The top order failing, Jaiswal getting out softly with that soft dismissal. He chipped it straight to square leg. Shubman Gill nicked off. Excellent catch by Mitchell Marsh in the gully. Virat Kohli nicked off again, which is a common theme and a pattern in his batting. Rishabh Pant was not quite himself. Rohit Sharma under more pressure, out for another low score. And I suppose a positive was, KL Rahul and Jadeja. Those two really stood up, really, when the team needed it. And in the second innings, really, none for 8, chasing 275 runs to win, but the rain came and pretty much brought the game to an end and brought the second innings to an end for India. So that's how India batted in this match. It was a bit of a mixed bag, really. The top order, as I mentioned, the woes continue. 3 for 22 inside 7.2 overs. As I mentioned, Jaiswal getting out to Mitchell Starc again, just chipping a ball straight to square leg. Mitchell Marsh took a catch there. Shubman Gill driving outside the off stump, flashing hard. Excellent catch by Mitchell Marsh in the gully. And yet again, Mitchell Starc got that wicket. Virat Kohli getting out, way outside off stump, nicking off. He has a problem with that. That's been a common pattern for him over the years. Josh Hazlewood got him out. So the top order for India, that's a concern. You need your top order to stand up. And I suppose in this series, the batting has been difficult. Batting has been tough. Both bowling attacks, well, really, the only bowler who's doing the damage for India is Bumrah. And the bowling attack that Australia has, the likes of Cummins, Starc, and Hazlewood and Scott Boland and Nathan Lyon doing the damage as well. Both batting sides are finding it tough in this series. So the top order need to do better. They need to apply themselves better. Jaiswal, he's a young, exciting player. That 100 he scored in Perth was magnificent. But since then, he's been very poor. Shubman Gill, we all know what type of player he can be, but he hasn't really delivered in Test cricket with that potential and talent. Virat Kohli, getting towards the end of his career than it started. He's getting on a bit. He scored that 100 in Perth, but once you get to this age, it's very hard to find that consistency, and he's getting out the same way. That's a bit of a problem for India. They need Jaiswal, they need Gill, they need Kohli to score runs for Melbourne because they can't afford to be 3 down for not many. That's the same thing that happened in Adelaide. It's the same thing that happened here in Brisbane. They've got to stop that trend. Hopefully they can apply themselves better going forward. As I mentioned, KL Rahul was the positive. I really enjoyed watching KL Rahul bat. Just old school, really. Just good old-fashioned test match cricket. Nothing flashy about KL Rahul. 139 balls he faced for the 84. He was the only Indian batter, along with Jadeja, to really hold the innings together for India because, at 5 down for 74, it looked pretty ugly. But when KL Rahul joined Jadeja, they sort of got the innings back on track, and India were able to avoid the follow-on and not being asked to follow on by Australia, and pretty much went on to save the test match. KL Rahul had a life. He was dropped by Steve Smith, first ball of day 4 to Pat Cummins. Steve Smith dropped that straightforward catch at first slip, but then he got out to Nathan Lyon, and it was a pretty good catch from Steve Smith at first slip when he stuck out the right hand to catch that ball. So KL Rahul was the standout. He's been the most consistent batter for India in this series. And then we come to Rohit Sharma in terms of his captaincy. I think he's under the pump. As I mentioned at the start of the episode, I think Rohit Sharma is the most happiest man on earth because he got away with a heavy defeat here in Brisbane. If we're honest, it was shaping up to be a heavy defeat. If the test match wasn't affected by rain and weather, India looked like probably losing this test match quite badly, given how this test match was shaping up. And I think for Rohit Sharma, he's got a bit more breathing space. I don't think he has much to go in terms of his captaincy and also probably playing side of things at the moment. He is under pressure severely. His decision to bowl first was in question. He failed again with the bat. His captaincy was left to be desired, especially when Travis Head was going the way he was going. Rohit Sharma didn't have any answers. It looked like he was pretty defensive. He wasn't really attacking. And I think the best way to combat Travis Head is to be attacking. If Travis Head wants to be attacking, then set attacking fields, be attacking with the ball, and play the same game as Travis Head is playing. And I don't think Rohit Sharma in India did that, really. They just ran out of ideas. They tried different plans. Every ball, every over was a different plan. They didn't stick to one plan. They didn't bowl too many short balls to him. Rohit Sharma was setting one-day fields or, protecting boundaries and not really attacking. He's the prize wicket. You know that he's the important cog in the Australian batting lineup. As it is with India with the bowling with Bumrah, it's either Bumrah or bust. But for Australia, the batting, it's either Travis Head or bust. So, if you get Travis Head out, Australia are vulnerable. So I think for India, what they need to do going forward is that if Travis Head wants to play this attacking brand of cricket, then be attacking yourself. Set attacking fields. Play him at his own game, and he will get found out, and he will fall on his own sword, so to speak. But Rohit Sharma didn't do that. He's quite a pretty conservative captain in terms of his field placements and his tactics. But he is under pressure, Rohit Sharma, and he really needs to deliver. If he doesn't score runs in the next 2 test matches, I won't be surprised if he follows Ravi Ashwin's lead and probably retire at the end of this series. And that was a bit of a shock when Ravi Ashwin announced his retirement after this 3rd test. But I don't think Rohit Sharma is far behind. If he doesn't do well in the next 2 test matches, he is under pressure. So India's batting, some problems, concerns with the top order. They need runs from Jaiswal, Gill and Kohli. Rishabh Pant hasn't been quite himself either, especially in the last 2 test matches. Rohit Sharma needs some runs, but I suppose the positives was KL Rahul and Jadeja. And, avoiding the follow-on as well was another positive from India's batting in this test match. Now then, let's talk about the bowling quickly for India. And the bowling was pretty good for India. There was one person that was outstanding, and that was Jasprit Bumrah. pretty much led the way again with the ball for India, taking 9 wickets in the match, 6 in the first, 3 in the second. He continues his good form. Pretty much for India, they didn't quite get it right on day one. They bowled a bit short with the new ball on day one, didn't quite get it right, but then they started to get it right by pitching the ball up a bit fuller, enticing the batters to play. But Travis Head, Steve Smith put on that big partnership. Both of them got hundreds. The tactics were a bit over the place, especially to Travis Head with the ball, as we just discussed with Rohit Sharma before. Didn't quite get it right there. Australia were able to make 445 all out in their first innings. And that's pretty much where India were pretty much on the back foot in this test match, really. But in the second innings, they took 7 wickets. Understandable what Australia were trying to do. They were throwing the bat, trying to score some runs quickly. 7 for 89. They picked up 7 wickets, India. 2 wickets each to Siraj and Deep, 3 to Bumrah. Was pretty good. And I suppose for the Indian bowlers, they got a bit of confidence going into Melbourne because of that. But yeah, Bumrah, what can you say about Jasprit Bumrah? He does it again, keeps doing it again. Unplayable. The Australian top order can't have any answers, don't really have any answers to combat him. He's just a one-of-a-kind bowler, isn't he? Be interesting to see how Bumrah pulls up. It's 3 test matches into this series. We're halfway through the series. We've still got 2 tests to go. It will be interesting to see how Jasprit Bumrah pulls up. Obviously, in Adelaide, he picked up a little bit of cramp. Going into this test match, there were some question marks about his fitness, but he proved to be okay. He was bowling pretty well. His speeds were a bit down at times, but that's just, getting back into the work and getting warmed up again. But it will be interesting to see how he pulls up and how he goes in the next 2 tests, because we're getting to that point in the series where, everyone's a bit fatigued and tired, especially on the bowling side of things. And Bumrah has bowled a lot of overs in this test match. He bowled 28 overs in the first innings. He only bowled 6 in the second. So that's a combined total of 34 overs for the match. Plus the overs he bowled in Adelaide, plus the overs he bowled in Perth. It's starting to build up. So he can't afford to miss a test or 2, because for India, they know that Bumrah is the key. If Bumrah goes down, then they're in trouble. The bowling support is not quite there for India at the moment. So they really need to make sure that Bumrah is okay. I suppose, Siraj in the first innings didn't really quite bowl at his best. Maybe the events of Adelaide probably had an impact on him. He had a bit of problems with his leg. I think he went off the field for some treatment, maybe some cramp, maybe a bit of an injury concern. Akashdeep came in to play his first test match of the series. I thought he bowled okay. His figures don't quite reflect that. Jadeja was ineffective. Didn't really have much to do with the ball. Pretty much he was ineffective. Kumar Reddy, bowled okay, but went for runs. So the bowling support for Bumrah is still lacking. And the Indian bowlers need to lift. Bumrah can't do it on his own. So that's the questions going into the next test for India, is that can the bowling pretty much support Bumrah and get him the support that he needs, is the question. But for India's bowling, I suppose they got something out of the second innings. The first innings was a bit of a concern in terms of tactics to Travis Head and the bowling support not really helping Bumrah out that much. So they've got a lot of things to work on going into Melbourne. So I think India, coming out of this test match, I think they'll be very pleased about getting out of this test match with a draw. But they've still got a lot of work to do in terms of their top order batting, the bowling support for Bumrah. If they can get those things right, then there are a chance of doing well in the next 2 test matches in Melbourne and Sydney. But we'll have to wait and see what happens in those 2 test matches and how both batting and bowling side of things for India respond in those last 2 test matches of the series. Now, let's cast our mind to the 4th test of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy, which will be at the MCG between Australia and India, the traditional Boxing Day test, which is always a highlight of the Australian cricket calendar. And this is going to be the most pivotal test match of this series. With the series locked at 1-1, this test match is so important for both teams in terms of winning the series. I think whoever wins this test match in Melbourne will go a long way in winning the series. So that's how important this test match is in the context of the series. So let's have a look at the stats between Australia and India at the MCG in test matches. Well, first test match was played in 1948 between these two countries here at the G. 14 matches, 2 of them have been drawn. Australia have won 8 games to India's 4. And the last 2 results at the MCG between India and Australia, India won in 2018-19. That was by 137 runs. And the last series, 2020-21, India won by 8 wickets in that test match. So India have 2 wins in the last 2 series here at the MCG, and they do like playing in Melbourne and Sydney, whereas in Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane, not so much. That's why Australia were banking on being probably 2-1 up at the end of this third test match, but that wasn't to be because of the weather and this test match in Brisbane ending in a draw. Now, let's talk about both teams in terms of potential 11s and what they need to do better in this 4th test than they did in the 3rd test. Now, we'll start with the Australian team. Some big news. Obviously, Sam Constance has been rushed into the test squad for this 4th test on Boxing Day at the MCG. He comes in for Nathan McSweeney, who's been dropped. And the Australian selectors have swung the axe. They've said, right, the McSweeney experiment didn't quite work out. So we're going to go to the kid and Sam Constance, who's 19 years old, and he's going to potentially make his debut at the top of the order for this 4th test at the MCG. Obviously, for McSweeney, it's been a tough start to his international career. It's been a tough start to his test career. The Australian selectors, George Bailey, said that it was a difficult decision to leave McSweeney out, but he said, we remain confident that Nathan has the ability and temperament to succeed at test level in the future. Those are the words of George Bailey in terms of leaving McSweeney out in favour of Sam Constance. So George Bailey went on to say about Sam Constance, about him being in the side, that pretty much he said it has been clearly been a challenge at the top of the order for the batters throughout this series. And we want to provide the option of a different lineup for the next 2 matches. His style of batting, this is Sam Constance, George Bailey says his style of batting offers a point of difference, and we look forward to watching his game develop further in the future. So that's why Sam Constance has been called up to the test squad. And obviously Nathan McSweeney is not really that dasher at the top of the order. I think his strike rate in this series, McSweeney's around about 34. So George Bailey, the Australian selectors, want to make a change. And I suppose that brings question marks, I suppose. You know, if you wanted a point of difference and you wanted a player that offers a point of difference with their batting and be aggressive, we've seen from Sam Constance in the Big Bash recently for the Sydney Thunder, scoring that 50. I think he scored that 50 off 20-odd balls or something like that. What he's done in the Sheffield Shield when he scored those back-to-back hundreds for New South Wales, what he did in the Prime Minister's 11 match for India in that game when he played against India and scored that 100, is that he does have that aggressive style about him. He has a bit of something about him. So my only question is, if you wanted that in the first place, why didn't you select him at the start of the series? So to me, this selection of Constance, I'm not criticizing the selection. It's just more of the decision, sort of reactive decision, where we are in the series. Australia up 1-1. They wanted to be 2-1 up after Brisbane because if they win the last 2 tests, then they have a chance of winning the series outright. But I can see why they did it. To me, it's more of a reactionary decision than, you know, just sort of reacting on the situation of the series. But I'm sure Sam Constance deserves the call-up. He does, because he's batted well. He's showed a lot of promise and talent. But I think for Nathan McSweeney, you got to feel for him. It's not easy facing Bumrah with a new ball at the top of the order in this series. But I suppose with the series on the line at 1-1, Australia felt like they could make a change. And, you know, hopefully that will bring them a change of fortune. Hopefully it does. Hopefully Sam can come out, debut on Boxing Day, which is a great dream for any young cricketer. For him to debut on Boxing Day, he will be, the recent debutant for Australia in a Boxing Day test. I think the last one to debut for Australia in a Boxing Day test was Ed Cowan, and that was back in 2011, and that was against India when Ed Cowan debuted on Boxing Day. He's the last Australian cricketer to debut on Boxing Day in Test cricket for Australia. For Constance, he'll be the youngest debutant that Australia's had since Pat Cummins, when Pat Cummins was 18 in 2011 against South Africa. Constance, he's 19 years old, so he's one of the youngest players that we've had for a while debuting for Australia. And he's definitely going to be the youngest opener that we've had in a while in Test cricket for Australia. That will be a proud moment, no doubt, for Sam Constance to make his debut here in this Boxing Day test. But he's definitely got talent. He scored big hundreds in the Sheffield Shield, back-to-back against South Australia. He scored 152, 105. He scored 73 at the MCG for Australia A against India A. And in that game, Nitish Kumar Reddy was a part of that India A team that played in that game at the MCG as well. So he's got a bit of experience facing Nitish Kumar Reddy, who's already played a few test matches in this series. Also, the 50 for the Sydney Thunder against the Adelaide Strikers the other night. He scored 56 off 27 balls. So he's definitely a talent. I can understand why the selectors and George Bailey have gone down this route. But I think we've got to be realistic, and I think we've got to tame our expectations for Constance. I think what Australia are banking on, that he comes in and makes an impact straight away. Now, I hope he does, but we've got to bear in mind that this is Test cricket. It's a different level. He hasn't faced Bumrah before. It's not going to be easy ramping Bumrah. He's played a few ramp shots, Constance. He played a few ramp shots in that Prime Minister's 11 match. I don't think you'll be ramping Bumrah with the way that he's bowling at the moment. He'll be very brave to do that, but I suppose he's 19 years old. He's got the exuberance of youth. He doesn't fear anything. He doesn't seem fazed. He seems pretty calm about making his debut. The comments that he made leading up to this moment, he said, if I get the chance, that's great, but I've worked hard for it. If it happens, it happens. And it's certainly going to happen in this fourth test for Constance. He's definitely going to make his debut, obviously with McSweeney now being out of the squad. So Australia pretty much announced their squad for this third test, obviously with for the fourth test, with no Josh Hazlewood being out because of the calf injury. He's been ruled out for the whole entire series. Obviously, Sam Constance comes in place of Nathan McSweeney. And then you have Jai Richardson. Good to see Jai Richardson back. He's had a few injuries, Jai, but good to see him back in the test side. He's a backup bowler for Australia to provide that extra pace if needed. But you would think Scott Boland definitely ahead of Jai Richardson, obviously. He should be back into the 11 for this fourth test at the G. So Australia have made some bold selection calls there. They've dropped McSweeney. They've brought in Constance to make a debut. They're hoping for a change of fortunes at the top of the order. They hope a point of difference can provide what Australia need in terms of combating the mighty Bumrah and hopefully put India under pressure and hopefully go on and win the series. So Australia's potential 11 for the fourth test, obviously Khawaja, Sam Constance to come in for McSweeney to make his debut, Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Mitchell Marsh, Carey, Cummins, Stark, Lyon, and Scott Boland to replace Josh Hazlewood, as it was the case when he replaced Hazlewood for the Adelaide test when Hazlewood was ruled out with that side strain. So that's most likely Australia's 11 for this fourth test. We come to the India side. India, be interesting to see what they do in terms of their 11. They made some changes for the Adelaide test to the Brisbane test. They brought back Jadeja. They brought Akashdeep in. Will they make any changes going into Melbourne? Maybe they will. Depends on conditions. But I think they probably keep the same 11, I think. I don't think India need to make too many changes. I think the 11 that they have for this test in Brisbane, yes, they didn't quite perform well at times, but do they really need to make changes for the sake of it and disrupt the cohesion that they've built with the team? I don't think they want to make too many changes, given that this test match is such an important test match in the series. You're locked at 1-1. You don't want to interrupt too many things. So I think they'll probably keep the same 11. I think, Akashdeep was pretty good with the ball in this third test. His figures don't quite reflect how well he bowled, but he provided some sort of support for Bumrah. Siraj was a bit up and down in this test match, but he'll probably keep his spot. Jadeja provided that extra strength with the batting. And now with Ravi Ashwin retiring after this third test, India have some other options to go to if they want to make some changes to the 11. But I think for India, they'll probably most likely keep the same 11 as they had for Brisbane. I don't think they need to change too much. You could make some changes based on conditions, but do you really want to disrupt the team, make too many changes? Because when they made changes for the Adelaide test from Perth to Adelaide, they made 3 changes. They brought Gill back, they brought Rohit Sharma back, and they brought Ashwin in from that first test to the second test in Adelaide. So I don't think they need to make too many changes, but we shall see. But their potential 11 could be Jaiswal, Rahul, Gill, Kohli, Pant, Rohit Sharma, Jadeja, Kumar Reddy, Siraj, Bumrah, and Deep. As I mentioned before, this test match is so crucial in terms of the context of the series. Whoever wins this test match will probably go on to win the series, you would think. For India, there's obviously pressure on them to win, of course. If they do win, then if the last test match in Sydney is a draw, then obviously they win the series. And even if Australia lose here in Melbourne and they win in Sydney, if it's a drawn series, India still retain the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. So you would think pressure's on Australia to win than India, obviously. But as we've seen in this series thus far, it's very hard to predict who's going to do what. This series has had many twists and turns over the 3 test matches, and no doubt it will be the same in this 4th test. But, you can toss a coin and you can decide who's going to win. But what we do know is that with the series locked at 1-1, it's going to be an exciting test match nonetheless. And hopefully we will see some good test cricket and hopefully some very good entertainment and hopefully a big crowd on Boxing Day. The Boxing Day test is sold out for the first few days, which is fantastic. So it's definitely going to be an exciting test match, as always, on Boxing Day at the MCG. So we shall wait and see what happens in this 4th test of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. Some of my thoughts to end from this 3rd test review of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India. Some of my thoughts that I got from the test match, some of my thoughts and what I observed during this test match. Despite the rain during this 3rd test, we saw some pretty entertaining cricket throughout. Great hundreds from Head and Smith, plus some good bowling from Bumrah, which is not a surprise, and some outstanding fielding from Steve Smith and Mitchell Marsh, taking those spectacular catches. I think Australia will be disappointed not to get a result in this test match. For most of it, they were in front. They tried their best to enforce the follow-on and batted quickly to try and set up a result, but the rain upsetted their plans. India will be delighted to get out of this test with a draw. They were on the back foot for most of this test match, but showed great fight with the bat to avoid the follow-on and showed some great fight with the ball to get some wickets and try and get some momentum back in this test match. With the series now leveled at 1-1, it sets up an exciting Boxing Day test. So let's hope we see a great test match, and obviously, no doubt we will. And hopefully the weather is fine, and hopefully we get a result in the 4th test of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India. Thanks everyone for listening to our 3rd test review of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on the 3rd test of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching and listening. And until next time, keep safe and bye for now.